This is a presentation on the 5 hidden dimensions of decision making. I'm a very practical guy, so let's get started. Traditionally, decisions are thought of as taking place in steps, usually a handful. For decisions, it's usually conceived of as 4 steps. We perceive a situation, we think of possible options, we calculate which is the best option, and we take action. For centuries, most people assumed that step 3, the rational calculation of the best option, was the most important. That's because perception seems simple, but actually it's quite complex. Perceiving the world is an active process of making meaning that shapes the rest of the decision making. Most of these processes take place below conscious awareness, and hence they are the hidden dimensions of decision making. You may not know who Jim Rogers is. He was the junior partner of George Soros in the Quantum Fund decades ago and is now a famous investor in his own right. He used to appear on what was called at that time Financial News Network in segments that featured investment managers. All of them were asked about their stock picks or buys. Instead of speculating on what to buy, Rogers would quiz the other managers. He would pointedly ask them, "What should I own now?" If you listen, you can hear that Jim has jumped the fence. As the famed Chicago bond trader Tom Baldwin used to refer to this as life before the trade and life after the trade. That is, one's perspective often changes a lot from before and after buying something or deciding something. Jim was trying to get there before he even bought it. Now, this is a specific example of decisions in general. That is, that there's life before a decision and there's life after a decision, any decision. Most people typically default to the before perspective. They look at the decision coming up from the outside, what they want to achieve, what options they have, how much time they have to make it, and perhaps what plans or preparations they might need to make. In their mind's eye, they typically jump into the decision for a moment or two. For example, how a meal might taste or a product feel, or something else depending on the decision. Of course, unless the product is right in front of them, this is a matter of memory and imagination, and it's often only for a moment. Still, most people take these to be pretty realistic assessments on which to base a decision. So the question is, what do you know after you've taken a decision that you didn't know before? With Roger's question, we notice there's a different perspectives and feelings between wanting to get something and already having it. The wanting to perspective is full of anticipation and expectations of how much better things will be. The ownership perspective implies responsibility. I mean, after all, you own it. And seeing the situation in terms of its current prospects instead of its potential promise. Now, some of you might object that this is an act of imagination and hence unreliable. Okay, but this ignores how much imagination is required for us to navigate almost every moment of our everyday experience. When we set a goal, we are engaged in an act of imagination. Yes, some of the real world outcome we want to achieve, we've seen somebody else do it, perhaps we've done some of it ourselves. And these are the basis of our desire. And in our making it our goal, we have to remake it to fit ourselves and our times. It's not the same thing exactly, it's changed, and that's an act of imagination. The same for when we are planning something, when we put together experiences from memory and ways to satisfy what we take to be the anticipated chain of events, which of course never turn out the way we planned, we're using our imagination. But that's okay because we anticipated, and imagining the situations, we at least have some readiness, some preparation to deal with. Finally, some of you may be familiar with the recent neuroscience research that shows that remembering isn't a process of recalling with photographic accuracy, but it is rather a rapid mental reconstruction of previous episodes in order to satisfy our present needs. That is, when we think of something that we need now, we don't go back and think of everything that was there at that time. We grab what piece of information we need and we use it. So all of these examples, all these different ways of interacting with the real world, at least in part, are acts of imagination, and often largely so. Being before a decision has certain habits associated with it. Before, the decision maker is often concerned with, well, how much time do I have before I have to decide? The decision deadlines, it's sometimes called. It's a way of encapsulating urgency. Putting aside the question of whether urgency improves decision making, what does the after perspective offer? The most overlooked aspect is, how long will this decision last? While this cannot be known with certainty, of course, every specific decision typically offers a range of time, whether it's a meal or buying a microwave or getting a car. So the question could be rephrased. How long do you expect this decision to last? Take the example of dining out. The before perspective is that the server will explain the specials, then you'll have a few minutes to decide before you're keeping the rest of the table waiting. The typical after perspective of that decision, whatever you order to eat and drink and then consume, is usually thought to last the duration of the meal. If you end up not liking what you ordered, you can always get something else or go somewhere else when you dine out next time. But wait, does what you eat and drink leave you after you leave the meal? I mean, if you overindulge yourself that evening, you might not sleep well, or you might wake up less clear-headed. If you're watching your weight, well, the next day you get to watch more of it. The fact is, everyone's decision of what to eat and drink lasts longer than their meals, but few people have that perspective. Instead, they use defaults like the length of the event, in this case, the time it took to eat the meal. Now, how would it affect your order if you thought that the meal lasted well into the next day? What if you included not only the dining event, but also how you felt afterwards, and how you would sleep later that night, and how you would feel the next morning as well? How does that change your decision of what to order? Well, the fact is, we already know how to do this. When we have an important obligation later that night or early the next morning, we tell our guests that we have to leave early, and we usually eat and drink lighter. We just don't think about it the rest of the time. This way of thinking about time involves the scopes of time of the decision. Every decision has one, really many more than one, and most people are unaware of them. They're hidden. The question to ask is, how long do you expect this decision to last? Many people will find this an odd question, and not everyone's going to answer the same way. That is, give the same scope of time. Take the situation of buying a car. Many people look at it from before the purchase, combining that with some test drive episodes, either real or imagined. Considerations are often given to near-term needs like what will be the mileage and what's the required maintenance. But many people haven't thought to ask, how long do you expect this decision to last? When they add in events that are likely to occur during this duration, like taking a long trip, possibly moving to another city, starting a business, starting a family, and so on, these needs may considerably alter their decision. Coming back to Jim Rogers, though he never spoke it, this thought must also have been in his mind. After all, if you already own something, how much longer do you expect to own it? Again, you probably do not have a precise length of time in mind. And we do have a range of time and conditions for many things. While Rogers didn't say, the legendary investor Warren Buffett is much more forthcoming about this. He has publicly stated that the right amount of time to own a stock is forever, and that this scope of time informs his decision making, even when he ends up selling it sooner than that because of a change of conditions. You may notice that larger scopes of time often include more people. That's not surprising. We are social creatures, and we also have decisions of small scopes of time that may require many people. You can think of life and death or high stakes decisions that need to take place in a short part of time. And these are usually more procedural and are found in hospitals and the military and situations like that. Which brings us to the next hidden dimension, the scope of people. That is, who is involved in this decision? Not necessarily before the decision, but certainly those who have to live with the decision after it is made. This scope is a bit more hidden than the scopes of time, as we often include this scope naturally. Some decisions we make by ourselves, and some in concert with those around us. And the fact is, a great many other situations we simply defer to others and let them take the decision. Take the example of dining out again. We may independently decide what to eat, or we might consult with our companion and make some complementary decision. Or we might defer to someone who's more experienced with the restaurant or the cuisine. As many everyday decisions can work with any of these scopes of people, they often come off without a hitch. In the cases of buying a car, though, you might think the decision is yours alone, but is it? If you're married and you only have one car, there are at least two people inside the scope of that decision. If new additions are imminent, this will increase the scope again. These are easy to understand compared to much of the rest of our lives. These days, whatever kind of work we do, much of it is done in groups or teams. These may be workmates, shift mates, project partners, or some other designation. These teams may have fixed membership, be ad hoc, or even virtual. It is common in business that decisions are often taken by people who are not involved in these groups, or it's work product after the decision is taken. Not that that's a good idea. On the other hand, in the name of efficiency, people who are making the decision are often prone to quickly restrict the decision makers to those they see as immediately involved, that is, before the decision. It might make things easier. It also leaves out important perspectives on the decision process. All of which is to say that, like the scope of time, decision makers often default to familiar scopes of people without conscious awareness that they have done so. The remedy is to mentally move to the implementation and see who is involved in living with the decision. Those are the people you want to keep in mind to talk to before you take the decision is made, if that's possible. These people may already be around you, or they may be separated from you by some distance. With families and corporate teams, this number can get quite large. The question is whose lives will be affected and how. You need to see them in enough detail in your mind's eye to know those probative effects. Talk with them to get their perspective. This is done to improve a decision, not simply to make it more complicated. By including alternative perspectives and the people and resources that go with them, you can open up the circumstances of the decision to something entirely new and better. And if not, this approach has been demonstrated to keep people from making the most stupid of mistakes, ones where they have a blind spot or forgot something. If increasing the scope of people with its increased human interactions is daunting for you, it is possible to increase the scope gradually. You could systematically vary the number of people involved and see how these work with each addition and even subtraction, and how they offer you a better basis for making the decision. Increasing the number of people involved in a decision will necessarily increase the space, if only to accommodate them. This brings us to the third dimension, the scope of space. Like our previous scopes, the space is the decision takes part in is often invisible. We eat in a restaurant. We buy a car in an auto dealership or from a former owner. What could be more obvious? And so I'll offer you an example from my own experience, since I know my experience better than yours, that can give you a larger sense of how this works. A couple of years back, my wife and I had to move. This was unplanned and very inconvenient. Also, I hadn't moved in some time and so had little experience with doing it. There were many other demands on our time at that time. This constrained our scope of time, which could easily have constrained where my wife and I might look for a new place, our scope of space. In researching this decision, I quickly realized the most important part of the move was getting everything onto the truck. So even though I had no idea specifically where we wanted to move, I opened up the scope of space to the continental United States. I reached out to friends and colleagues as far as Texas and as far northwest as the state of Washington and several places in between. Here that I've increased the scope of people involved as well. After comparing favorable factors involving 5 separate locations, we reduced the scope of space back to the greater Chicago area where we already are, satisfied that this was the best location for the next 2 years. And there you can hear a future scope of time. Then with a friend in the Chicago real estate business, we looked at neighborhoods from the south side to the north shore. My wife and I actually ended up moving a few miles from where we used to live, and it's a world of difference in a very good way. This example points out several things about the scope of space. They can vary their size in the extreme. In this case, from my old neighborhood to the better part of a continent, and even more. They can be singular scopes or they can be multiple. And within the scope of the United States, I looked into 5 different areas or scopes of space before I picked one, and then I did that again in the Chicago area. Now, some of you might think it's silly I did all that searching only to move a few miles. By increasing the scope of space and then decreasing them, I assured a more satisfactory decision. Think of it as an inoculation against regret. I now knew what was out there, and I have a start on the information that I'll need for the next move, which, as you recall, is scoped to be in just a few years. Many of you are already expanding your scopes of space. You do it almost every time you buy something on the internet. Instead of relying on a local store, you buy products and services from far-flung providers. This virtual scope of space makes it possible to seek education, employment, and other opportunities far beyond the nearby big city, which is something that I had to do when I was young. Even so, as more people are more plugged in, they may not realize that in other areas of life, they're inadvertently using default scopes of space. That is, they're not looking over their fence or out of their neighborhood or out right where they are. These three scopes of time, people, and space are somewhat interdependent. That is, varying one will tend to vary the other two, as you've noticed, though not necessarily. Deliberately varying these scopes, that is, making them larger and smaller, more numerous and fewer, can give you very different perspectives on what you thought you knew and quite possibly change what you intend to decide for something better. So I have a question. What is the difference between a big decision and a small one? Take a moment and think about it. For most people, it will have to do with the magnitude of their effects. Big decisions are life-changing, and their effects are typically difficult to undo. Think of going away to college, or joining the military, or getting married, or moving to a new place. Small decisions are the opposite of that. They happen every day, sometimes many times a day. If one doesn't work out, there's another one coming along. That said, I'd like to point out an obvious, though little appreciated difference between big decisions and small ones: size. If you look at a big decision in your mind's eye, perhaps when you were just comparing them, characteristically it will fill up much of your mental space. Typically, this enlarged image is higher than you by a bit and like a movie screen. You might even need to lift your head up to look at it a bit. This is how you know it's important. After all, if you saw it lower and much smaller, you would know it wasn't important. What this suggests is that certain qualities of our internal mental images, their size, their elevation, and their distance from us, let us know what they mean. Big decision images are more important, sometimes even overwhelming. Lower decision images are more ordinary and often feel more achievable. Mentally close decision images demand immediate action, while those images that are farther away appear smaller and so get less attention. A quick cognitive neuroscience explanation for all this is that our experience in the world is the foundation for the organization of our minds. In the world, big things get our attention, especially if they're moving towards us. Small things are of a size we are confident we can handle. Things that we look up to have a similar meaning, whether they are mountains, the sky, or our parents when we were small. Things that we look down on are often considered lesser and even contemptible and disgusting if they are on or below the ground. Things can get too close for comfort when we really want some breathing room. These experiences of the outside world form the basis of our inside worlds. Even understanding something as simple as a dark day or a bright idea comes from our everyday experience of growing up with darkness and light. Is it clear yet what this might have to do with decision making? The way someone imagines a decision in his or her mind's eye is going to have a tremendous influence on that decision. To take a typical decision difficulty, people with big decisions often feel overwhelmed by them. If I suggest they bring the decision down or put more distance between themselves and the decision, they feel better right away. But they often protest to me that it's not a reasonable response because it's a big decision. I point out that if seeing a big decision reduces their strategy to screaming at themselves, something like, "This is really important, don't blow it," it's hardly a useful mental strategy. If thinking of a decision in the mind's eye as lower and smaller and at a relaxed distance makes it for a more thoughtful analysis, then that's the way to go, regardless of the way it's supposed to be. There's a cliche that makes this point: making a mountain out of a molehill. It just doesn't tell you to change it back to a molehill. As you can see, this dimension of decision making is even more hidden than the previous scopes of time, people, and space. That may be because everything in our experience, inside our minds and outside in the world, is scaled to everything else. That is that something being big is relative to something small. High is relative to low. Near is relative to far. And dark is relative to light. Every decision is internally scaled in our mind's eyes. What this means is that each of us, in each of our decisions in our mind's eyes, are a size relative to the size of the decision. This can greatly vary according to the individual. I've had individuals describe an overwhelming decision as being much larger than them. When the effects of the decision are personal and the conditions appropriate, I sometimes wonder aloud, if you didn't exist, how big would that decision be? With some surprise, they often remark that if they didn't exist, there wouldn't be a decision to make. Oh, so the decision depends on you for its very existence, I add. When they look again, the decision has resized itself, often much smaller and easier to handle than before. As an exercise, you can think of an upcoming decision of modest importance you're willing to experiment with, that you're willing to have more ideas about. Think of that decision now. And as you think of that decision, notice where it is in your mind's eye. The clarity of your inner image doesn't matter as long as you know what the decision is and can sense where it is. At what height does it hang? Is it above or below or on your eye level? What is its distance from you? Would you describe it as dark, light, or normally lit? Answer these questions for yourself. Now allow me to invite you to make some gentle alterations. If the decision hangs above eye level, slowly bring it down so it's at eye level. Notice what changes, if any, you have in your thoughts or feelings. We all know there's a difference between something lorded over us and for something to be on the level. You may have noticed something similar happen when you change the position of your decision. Sometimes people will tell us that the decision won't move. When this happens, I suggest they simply make themselves larger in their mind's eye while the rest of the scene stays constant. Since if they are larger and as a result taller, the image, of course, will be naturally lower. This is what it means to say that size is relative. Now, return the decision to its original location and yourself to your original size, and we'll try another alteration. This time, let the decision image get smaller, and again, notice changes in your thoughts and feelings as you do so. If the image won't get smaller, you could simply move it farther away, or alternatively, you could leave the image where it is and take a few mental steps back. Each of these accomplishes the same thing. That is, when it occupies less space, it literally leaves more space for other ideas. The presence of these other ideas allows for comparisons of the decision to other experiences and other decisions. Peter Drucker, the great and practical management professor, noted that a unique decision was an anomaly, that most kinds of decisions had been made before, either by ourselves or others, and that we could use that experience. First, though, we need to clear enough mental space to make those comparisons possible and draw on those other occasions and other people. Okay, now once again, return the image to its original size and you to your original location if you move, and we'll try another alteration. This time, adjust the brightness of your decision image. This is analogous to adjusting the brightness on your phone or computer or television screen. Depending on the initial illumination of the image, it might make more sense to brighten it or to darken it. Brightening a dull image can bring it more into focus. There is actually a physical relationship between the degree of illumination and focus. On the other hand, an image that is too bright makes it difficult to look at easily. And so by reducing the brightness, you can get a better look at it. Try out both of these. That is, a darker image and a brighter image, noticing what thoughts and feelings you have, and finish up with an illumination level you find comfortable for you. These kinds of changes in location, in space, of distance, of elevation, of size, of illumination can be used with other elements of a decision process. The options, the resources, the obstacles, as things or mental events or even other people in mind. I've just used one for the simplicity. And that all these different elements of a decision can all be rescaled individually or in concert, much like tuning an orchestra or a band. increasing some of them, decreasing others, and with these 4 scales, creating the optimal situation for the best possible decision. We have now looked at altering 4 scales found in every decision: size, elevation, distance, and illumination. Not only is this dimension completely hidden from traditional decision making, it's also basic to our understanding of experience. Our size, elevation, and distance from things in our world and the brightness at the time has been crucial for our development, and hence is the internal basis of much of our understanding. As Pythagoras wrote in the 5th century BC, man is the measure of all things. These scales are certainly the measures we use within ourselves. Now that you know these 4 scales can be altered with intention, you can now rescale that decision in your mind's eye to make it easier and more effective. This might involve moving it lower and making it smaller by moving it back and brightening it for better clarity, or moving it closer while making it smaller, or even making it bigger while moving it farther away, or some other configuration that gives you better options, greater clarity, and an informed confidence to make the decision you want. Similar to scopes, these scales are interdependent as well as independent, and simply experimenting with different configurations can uncover new perspectives and possibilities. Our 5th and final hidden dimension of decision making is the category of a decision. Decades ago, the philosopher Gregory Bateson wrote that context or frame of a particular content is often unstated, that it was more revealed by a tone of voice, an implication, than an actual word, and that moreover, when the frame was stated, that it often had the effect of immediately changing it. For example, a father saying to his teenage son, "We need to talk," immediately changes it from their talking to each other to something entirely differently. In other words, the category of the conversation is changed. These context frames, stated and unstated, name what category of experience the content belongs to. Every decision has them. Naming a decision category as a type of decision has inherent advantages and limitations. For example, a management decision, a marketing decision, a personal decision, a purchase. You'll notice with each of those that you thought in a different way. Your attention was directed to different kinds of elements and ideas to keep track of. This is what we're talking about. This mental category, chosen or not, stated or not, restricts what the decision is about. That is, what the decision means. It reduces the options to those that are included in the category. After all, a management decision will have different options than a personal decision. It even rules out facts that don't fit in the category. Changing the name of a decision changes the category along with the meaning of many of its elements. Since I don't have someone to work with, I'll do a demonstration with a deceptively easy category to give you an idea what you can do with this. I assume most of you have some sort of smartphone that you bought it based on an idea of what you want. When you were in the process, you probably would have called it buying a phone. Let me ask you a few questions. I will ask these questions as if you are still in the buying process. Answer each one as fully and vividly as you can in the time allowed to yourself, of course. What is the purpose of this decision? What is important about this decision? What is this decision an example of? That is, for example, my phone purchase is an example of my technical savvy, or my phone purchase is an example of my fashion sense, or my phone purchase is an example of the ways I connect with people. You get the idea. Think of your own. Now, as you think of your decision and even your device, they might seem different to you. If the purpose of your decision is to have a conduit to the world, that is much more than a phone. If the importance of your decision is that you can reach anyone, anytime, and they can reach you, then your decision is really about buying a network, not just a phone. Whatever your decision is an example of, these are meanings beyond the tech specs of the device you purchased. That is, they are from another category that has another set of elements and criteria that are much more about your identity than your phone, which is actually largely a commodity since it has to work with all the networks and all the other phones. While this is a simple example of a purchase, it might give you an idea of what you could accomplish with a specific decision difficulty. A person making a decision is trying to do so from within the limits of a certain category. Asking about the purpose engages their intention before and beyond the decision. This larger category will have other ideas and opportunities in it. Asking what is important about a decision engages the values above the decision. This accesses a larger category in a different direction. Asking what the decision is an example of begins to deliberately resort the category to which the decision belongs. And if I don't see a new category that offers more degrees of freedom, I will ask for another category. We humans are creative that way. There are multiple ways to categorize just about everything. And if you've forgotten this, just watch a small child a while and you'll be reminded. Of all the hidden dimensions, this one is most amorphous, and yet it can make the most difference because it changes what the decision means. To pull back the curtain a bit, when a change in the scopes of time or people or space changes a decision, it's the category of that decision that has changed. When a change in the scales of size, elevation, distance, and illumination change the thoughts or feelings about a decision, it's the category of that decision that has changed. These 5 hidden dimensions of decision-making were chosen because they are interdependent. When you're learning to work with them, you are actually learning to work with all of them. So start with whatever interests you. You will find yourself soon doing the others. Years ago, when I first used to do presentations on these topics, I would open by asking, what's the difference between lunch and life? With what we have covered today, I'm sure you have some ideas. Life, of course, is the biggest scope of time, people, and space that we get to have while we're here. Everything is inside it. Lunch is a comparatively very small scope of time, people, and space, and we get plenty of it. We don't mind too much if we get a mediocre lunch because there's always another one the next day. Whereas most of us really don't want a mediocre life. If we want, we can be very specific about what we want for lunch, whereas a lot of us aren't really sure what we really want for life. The scales of size, elevation, distance, and illumination are much better suited to lunch than life. Life is longed for in the abstract, and it's lived in the specific, which suggests a possible category change. Perhaps life is a lot of lunches of every variety, leaning, of course, in the direction of your culinary tastes, and dinners, and breakfasts, and mornings, and work days, and weekends, and family, and friends, and homes, and offices, and vacations, and everything else in the world as well. This was very clearly a quick overview of 5 separate distinctions that can be explored in much greater depth. Decision-making was chosen in an application because of the strong interest in it and my ability to show you some immediate applications. The category of problems, as in the 5 hidden dimensions of problems, could just as easily have been substituted for decision-making with equally interesting results and transformative possibilities.